Jennifer, get down here right now! Father's voice boomed through the house as I crouched behind my bedroom door, clutching the bloody kitchen knife I'd just pulled from Victoria's chest. Her body lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs, dark red spreading across the white marble floor of our mansion. At 25, I had finally discovered the truth. The insurance policies, the slow poisoning, the way my real mother had accidentally fallen down these same stairs when I was 3. But my revenge had come too late. The poison coursing through my veins was already shutting down my organs. Even as Victoria bled out below, I could feel my own life slipping away. "I know what you did," I whispered, watching the light fade from her eyes. "I know everything." Then the world went black. The next thing I knew, I was 8 years old again, sitting cross-legged on my small twin bed, staring at a book report that was due tomorrow. My hands were tiny and unmarked, no scars from the IV needles, no tremor from the nerve damage. The calendar on my wall read March 15th, 2015. But I could hear them downstairs, the same voices, the same conversation that had haunted my nightmares for 17 years. The life insurance policy on Jennifer's mother was just approved, Victoria was telling someone on the phone, her voice honey-sweet. $2 million. And with Jennifer being the sole beneficiary until she turns 18, well, accidents happen to children all the time, don't they? My blood turned to ice. Even now, even at 8 years old, she was planning my death. I slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. Through the banister rails, I could see Victoria pacing in the living room, phone pressed to her ear. "The girl is too smart for her own good," she continued, always asking questions about her mother's accident. "But children are so clumsy, aren't they? Falls, drowning, food allergies. There are so many tragic ways a little girl could die." Behind her on the mantelpiece sat a framed photo of my real mother, Eleanor Morrison, the woman Victoria had murdered to steal her life, her husband, and her fortune. "Richard adores me now," Victoria laughed, that same melodious sound that had echoed in my ears as I died. "He has no idea his precious wife didn't slip on those stairs, and he'll never suspect me when his darling daughter has her own little accident." I gripped the banister so hard my knuckles went white. In my previous life, Victoria had started small. A little something in my food to make me sick. Accidents that sent me to the hospital, slowly building a medical history of a weak, sickly child. By the time I was 16, everyone believed I had inherited some mysterious genetic condition from my mother. But this time, I knew the truth. This time, I had 17 years of memories, 17 years of watching her methods, 17 years of understanding exactly how she operated. And this time, I wasn't going to wait around to be her victim. I turned and walked back to my room with purpose. If Victoria wanted to play the long game, she was about to discover that an 8-year-old with a 25-year-old's knowledge of her plans was far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. From my closet, I pulled out the small backpack I used for school trips. Inside my desk drawer was the emergency money Father had given me. $50 in case I ever got lost and needed to call a taxi. Under my mattress was the necklace my real mother had left me, the one Victoria didn't know existed, because I'd hidden it after her first cleaning spree of Mother's belongings. But most importantly, in my memory was every detail of how Victoria had killed my mother, every method she'd used to slowly poison me, every conversation she'd had thinking no one was listening. As I began packing my few precious belongings, I could hear Victoria ending her phone call downstairs. "Don't worry," she said with a laugh. "Within a year, that little girl will be nothing but a tragic memory. Richard will be so devastated, he'll need me more than ever, and all of Eleanor Morrison's money will finally be where it belongs. With me." I zipped up my backpack and pulled on my shoes. Victoria thought she was dealing with an innocent 8-year-old girl. She had no idea she was about to face someone who already knew exactly how this story was supposed to end, and had no intention of letting it happen the same way twice. The front door was just 20 steps away. Freedom was just 20 steps away, and this time I was the one in control. The hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Each creaking floorboard was a potential betrayal, each shadow a place where Victoria might be waiting. But I had advantages now that I'd never possessed in my first life. Knowledge, determination, and the element of surprise. I knew that in exactly 4 minutes, Father would come home from his business dinner. I knew that Victoria would greet him at the door with practiced tears, claiming I'd been acting strange and asking difficult questions about my mother again. I knew she would suggest it might be time to consider professional help for my unhealthy obsession with Eleanor's death. It was the first step in her long-term plan to paint me as an unstable child with psychological problems. When I eventually died under mysterious circumstances, everyone would remember the troubled little girl who couldn't accept her mother's accidental death. But not this time. I reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, listening. Victoria was in the kitchen now, probably preparing Father's late-night coffee, the same coffee she would later claim gave her the idea to start adding small doses of rat poison to my meals. Just to see how it affected children differently than adults, she would tell her contact at the insurance company years later, when she thought no one could hear. The front door was unlocked. Victoria never bothered with security. After all, who would suspect a grieving stepmother of anything but love for her late husband's child? My hand closed around the doorknob. In my previous life, I had trusted her. I had called her Mom and believed her tears were real. I had defended her when my paternal grandmother expressed suspicions. I had been the perfect victim. But the perfect victim had learned to be the perfect predator. As I turned the handle, I heard Father's car pulling into the driveway. Right on schedule. I slipped out into the night air, my backpack heavy with everything that mattered. My mother's necklace, my emergency money, and a small digital recorder I'd taken from Father's office, the one I'd used to record Victoria's phone conversation. Let Victoria explain to Father why his 8-year-old daughter had disappeared without a trace. Let her try to maintain her innocent facade when the child she'd planned to murder had simply vanished. I was done being Jennifer Morrison, the tragic victim. From now on, I was going to be someone else entirely. Someone Victoria would never see coming. The night air bit at my skin as I crept along the hedge that bordered our property. Behind me, I could hear Father's car door slamming shut, his heavy footsteps on the gravel driveway. In 30 seconds, he would discover the front door slightly ajar. In 60 seconds, Victoria would notice I wasn't in my room for the bedtime check she always insisted on. To make sure our little angel is safe and sound. But by then, I would be 6 blocks away, heading toward the one place Victoria would never think to look. The run-down apartment complex where my maternal grandmother lived. In my previous life, I had never met Dorothy Chen. Victoria had convinced Father that my mother's family was toxic and unstable. People who would only confuse me with lies about Eleanor's death. She had systematically cut off every connection I might have had to my mother's side, isolating me completely within her web of deception. But 25 years of overheard phone calls and discovered documents had given me something Victoria never expected, a complete map of everyone she had worked so hard to hide from me. Dorothy Chen lived at 847 Maple Street, apartment 3B. She worked night shifts at the county hospital as a cleaning supervisor. She had tried 17 times to gain visitation rights, to see me after Mother's death, each attempt blocked by Victoria's lawyers. And most importantly, she was the only person alive who had evidence that Eleanor Morrison hadn't simply slipped on those stairs. I reached the main road and stuck to the shadows, moving from streetlight to streetlight like a ghost. My small legs burned with the effort of covering so much distance, but adrenaline and fury pushed me forward. Behind me, sirens began to wail. Father had called the police to report me missing. Let them search. Let Victoria put on her performance of the distraught stepmother whose beloved daughter had inexplicably vanished. Every minute they spent looking in the wrong places was another minute I gained to reach my destination. The apartment complex loomed ahead, a cluster of faded brick buildings that had seen better decades. I climbed the exterior stairs to the 3rd floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. What if Dorothy wasn't home? What if she didn't believe me? What if Victoria had already poisoned her mind against Elena's memory? I raised my small fist and knocked on door 3. B. Footsteps approached from within, cautious and slow. A chain rattled, then the door opened just a crack, revealing a weathered face and suspicious eyes. "What are you doing here, child? It's nearly midnight." I looked up at the woman who shared my mother's dark eyes and delicate bone structure. "Grandmother Dorothy, my name is Jennifer Morrison. Eleanor was my mother." The door swung open so fast it nearly knocked me backward. Dorothy stood there in her hospital uniform, staring at me like I was a ghost, which, in a way, I was. "Eleanor's baby," she whispered, her hand flying to her throat. "My God, you look just like her at that age. But how did you... Richard said we could never..." "Victoria lied," I said simply, stepping into the small apartment. "About everything, and I can prove it." Dorothy's living room was a shrine to my mother. Photographs covered every surface. Eleanor as a child, as a teenager, graduating from college, holding me as a newborn. In the centre of it all was a wedding photo I had never seen. My parents on their wedding day, both radiant with happiness. "She wouldn't let me see you," Dorothy said, her voice breaking. "That woman claimed Eleanor's family was dangerous, that we would confuse you with lies. But Eleanor never slipped on those stairs, Jennifer. Your mother was murdered." I pulled out the digital recorder and set it on her coffee table. "I know, and I have proof." Dorothy's eyes widened as Victoria's voice filled the room, discussing insurance policies and planned accidents with cold calculation. As the recording played, I watched my grandmother's face transform from shock to horror to blazing fury. "That monster," Dorothy breathed. "That absolute monster. She killed my daughter and then stole her life. She's been planning to kill me too," I explained. "The same way she killed Mother, slowly, methodically, making it look natural. But I'm not going to let that happen." Dorothy knelt down and gripped my shoulders. "How did you get this recording? How did you know to come here?" I had prepared for this question during my long walk. "I've been having dreams," I lied smoothly. "Dreams about Mother, about what really happened. And I found some things hidden in Father's office. Documents about you, about the family Victoria tried to hide from me. It wasn't entirely untrue. In my previous life, I had found those documents, but only after Victoria was already dead and I was dying myself." Dorothy pulled me into a fierce embrace, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt truly safe. This woman would protect me. This woman would believe me. And most importantly, this woman had the resources to fight back. "We're calling the police right now," Dorothy said, reaching for her phone. "No." My voice was sharp enough to make her pause. "Not yet. Victoria is too smart, too prepared. She'll have explanations for everything, and Father will believe her. We need more evidence first." Dorothy studied my face with growing amazement. "You're 8 years old. How are you this calculating?" I had spent 17 years studying my enemy. I knew every weakness, every pattern, every contingency plan Victoria had ever made. but I couldn't explain that to Dorothy. "Mother visits me in dreams," I said instead. "She tells me things. She wants justice." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "She always said you were special. Even as a baby, you were so alert, so aware. Elena used to joke that you had an old soul." If only she knew how literally true that was. "Dorothy, I need your help with something important," I continued. "In my dreams, Mother showed me where she hid something before she died, evidence that Victoria has been planning this for years. That was another lie, but a necessary one. In my previous life, I had found Mother's journals during my final investigation into Victoria's crimes. Elena had been suspicious of her husband's new girlfriend, had documented strange incidents and conversations. But 8-year-old Jennifer couldn't possibly know where those journals were hidden. Dream Jennifer, however, could know anything. "Where?" Dorothy asked urgently. "The old oak tree in Riverside Park, the one with the hollow trunk where Mother used to leave messages when she was young. She told me there's a metal box hidden inside." Dorothy nodded, understanding flooding her features. "Eleanor and I used to use that tree as our secret mailbox when she was a teenager, if she hid something there. We have to get it before Victoria realizes I'm gone and starts covering her tracks," I urged. "Once Father reports me missing, she'll panic and destroy any evidence she hasn't already eliminated." Dorothy was already grabbing her car keys. "Let's go." As we drove through the sleeping city, I stared out the window at the familiar streets. In my previous life, Victoria had won because she controlled the narrative from the beginning. She had isolated me, manipulated Father, and eliminated anyone who might pose a threat to her plans. But this time, I had allies she didn't know about. This time, I had evidence she didn't know existed. And this time, I had the one advantage she could never account for: the memories of a woman who had already lived through her entire playbook. Riverside Park was empty at this hour, shrouded in shadows and silence. Dorothy parked near the old oak tree, its massive trunk twisted and gnarled with age. I led her to the hollow I remembered from Mother's journal entries, reaching inside with small fingers that could access places adult hands couldn't reach. My fingers closed around cold metal. The box was there, exactly where Mother had described hiding it. Inside were 3 journals, a photograph, and a small audio cassette tape. The photograph showed Victoria with another man, not Father, but someone I recognized from newspaper articles about suspicious deaths in other cities. The journals documented months of increasingly suspicious behaviour, strange illnesses that coincided with Victoria's visits, and Victoria's questions about insurance policies and inheritance laws. But the cassette tape was the real treasure. I had forgotten about it entirely until this moment, but seeing it brought back the memory of Mother playing it for me when I was barely 3 years old. "Jennifer, if anything ever happens to Mummy," Eleanor's voice whispered from the small recorder Dorothy had brought, "remember that I love you more than anything in the world, and remember that the woman who calls herself Victoria Blake has done this before. Her real name is Vanessa Cross, and she killed her first husband in Denver, her second husband in Phoenix, and she's going to try to kill your father and you too. But Mummy left evidence. Mummy left proof. And someday, when you're old enough to understand, you'll be able to stop her." Dorothy was sobbing openly now, clutching the cassette player like a lifeline. She knew. Eleanor knew, and she tried to warn us. I picked up the photograph again, studying the face of the man with Victoria. In my previous life, I had eventually learned his identity: Thomas Cross, Victoria's real husband, who helped her scout and eliminate wealthy targets across the country. He was supposed to be dead. Another tragic accident that had left Victoria free to pursue her next victim. But if this photograph was recent when Mother took it, then Thomas was still alive during Victoria's courtship of Father, which meant Victoria was a bigamist on top of being a serial killer. We have everything we need now, I told Dorothy, carefully repacking the evidence. But we have to be smart about how we use it. Victoria can't know we have this until we're ready to destroy her completely. Dorothy wiped her eyes and nodded. What do you need me to do? First, we're going to let Father and the police find me. I'll say I got scared and ran away, but you found me wandering and brought me home. That establishes our connection without making Victoria suspicious. And then, I smiled, and for a moment, Dorothy looked almost frightened by the cold calculation in an 8-year-old's expression. Then, we start building the trap that will make sure Victoria pays for every life she's destroyed, starting with my mother's. The game was about to begin, and this time I held all the cards Victoria didn't even know were in play. Dawn was breaking as Dorothy's car pulled into our driveway, where 3 police vehicles and Father's Mercedes sat like sentries. I could see Victoria pacing behind the living room window, phone pressed to her ear, no doubt coordinating with her network of enablers and accomplices. Remember, I whispered to Dorothy as we approached the front door, you found me walking along Highway 9, confused and scared. I told you my name and address, and you brought me straight home. Dorothy squeezed my hand. I still can't believe how composed you are about all this. If only she knew I'd rehearsed this exact scenario in my mind 1,000 times during my previous life, imagining what I would do differently if I ever got a second chance. The front door burst open before we could knock. Father rushed out, his face haggard with worry and relief. Jennifer! Thank God! Where have you been? I launched myself into his arms, letting genuine tears flow now. Daddy! I got scared and I ran away, but I got lost and this nice lady found me. Behind Father, Victoria appeared in the doorway, her performance of concerned motherhood flawless. But I caught the flash of calculation in her eyes as she studied Dorothy, trying to determine if this stranger posed any threat to her carefully constructed world. Oh, sweetheart, Victoria cooed, reaching for me. We were so worried about you. I shrank back against Father, letting my body language speak volumes. To the police officers watching, it would look like a traumatized child seeking comfort from her biological parent rather than her stepmother. This is Dorothy Chen, I said, looking up at her father with wide eyes. She works at the hospital, and she has the same eyes as the lady in the pictures. The lady, you said, was my real mommy. Father's face went pale. I watched Victoria's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She hadn't expected me to make that connection so quickly. Mrs. Chen, Father said carefully, I can't thank you enough for bringing Jennifer home safely. Dorothy stepped forward with the perfect balance of gratitude and restrained anger. Mr. Morrison, I've been trying to contact you for years about Jennifer. I'm Eleanor's mother, your daughter's grandmother. The temperature on the porch seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold fury beneath. I'm sorry, Victoria interrupted smoothly, but there must be some mistake. Jennifer's maternal family was... Well, Richard, we've discussed this before. There were concerns about their stability. Concerns? Dorothy's voice rose slightly. I'm a supervisor at County General Hospital. I've worked there for 23 years. What concerns could you possibly have about my stability? One of the police officers cleared his throat. Perhaps we should move this conversation inside. The child has been through enough excitement for one night. As we moved into the living room, I noticed how Victoria positioned herself between Dorothy and Father, her hand possessively on his arm. But I also noticed how Dorothy catalogued every detail of the house. The expensive furniture that had been bought with Mother's insurance money, the family photos that conspicuously excluded any images of Eleanor. I'm curious, Mrs. Chen, Victoria said with forced sweetness. How exactly did you happen to find Jennifer? It seems quite a coincidence. Dorothy met her gaze steadily, I was driving home from my night shift at the hospital when I saw a little girl walking alone on Highway 9. When I stopped to help, she told me her name was Jennifer Morrison and that her mother was Elena Morrison. Since Eleanor was my daughter, I brought her straight home. Your daughter? Father looked stunned. But Victoria said Eleanor's family had issues with substance abuse and mental illness. The lie hung in the air like poison. Dorothy's eyes flashed dangerously. Mr. Morrison, I don't know what this woman has told you about my family, but I assure you none of it is true. Eleanor was my pride and joy, valedictorian of her graduating class, scholarship to Stanford, never so much as a parking ticket, and she certainly never had any mental health issues until... Dorothy's gaze fixed on Victoria. Until she met someone who made her life very difficult. Victoria's smile became razor-sharp. I'm afraid Eleanor was quite troubled toward the end. She had become paranoid, making wild accusations about people trying to hurt her. The doctors said it was likely a hereditary condition. What doctors? Dorothy demanded. Elena's medical records show no such diagnosis. Private consultations, Victoria replied smoothly. Richard, surely you remember how concerned we were about Elena's deteriorating mental state before her accident? I watched Father's face, seeing the seeds of doubt Victoria had planted years ago taking root again. This was how she operated. Layers upon layers of carefully constructed lies, each one supported by just enough truth to seem believable. But I had an advantage Victoria didn't know about. Daddy, I said in my smallest, most innocent voice, the lady at the hospital says she has pictures of Mummy when she was little like me. Can I see them? Victoria's hand tightened on Father's arm. Jennifer, sweetheart, I don't think that's a good idea. It might confuse you about your memories of your mother. But I want to see what Mummy looked like when she was 8 like me, I insisted, looking up at Father with pleading eyes. Father hesitated, torn between his daughter's request and his wife's obvious disapproval. The police officers exchanged glances. They could sense the underlying tension, but couldn't quite identify its source. I don't see any harm in it, one officer said mildly. If Mrs. Chen is indeed the child's grandmother, family photos seem appropriate. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet, extracting a small photograph. It showed a girl who looked exactly like me at the same age, standing next to a younger version of Dorothy. Father took the photo with shaking hands. She looks just like Jennifer. Eleanor always said Jennifer had inherited the Chen family features, Dorothy said softly. The eyes, especially. I watched Victoria calculating furiously behind her mask of concern. She was realizing that Dorothy's sudden appearance wasn't the random coincidence it appeared to be, but she couldn't figure out how an 8-year-old had orchestrated this reunion. Mrs. Chen, Victoria said carefully, I'm sure you understand that Jennifer has been through tremendous trauma losing her mother so young. We've worked very hard to help her process that grief in a healthy way. Reopening those wounds could be psychologically damaging. What trauma counselling? Dorothy asked sharply. What grief processing? According to Jennifer, she's never been told anything about Eleanor beyond the fact that she died in an accident. Father looked uncomfortable. We thought it was best not to dwell on the details. Victoria felt that focusing on the future rather than the past would be healthier for Jennifer. And conveniently, Dorothy said, her voice hardening, that meant cutting off all contact with Eleanor's family, friends, and anyone who might tell Jennifer the truth about her mother. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Victoria's composure was beginning to crack under the pressure. I think, Victoria said tightly, that this has been quite enough excitement for one evening. Jennifer needs rest, and frankly, I'm not comfortable with strangers making accusations in our home. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Dorothy, I said, using her first name deliberately to emphasize our connection. You said you work at the same hospital where Mummy went before she died. Do you remember her being sick? Dorothy's eyes sharpened with understanding. No, sweetheart. Your mother was perfectly healthy the last time I saw her. In fact, she had just gotten a clean bill of health from her annual physical. Victoria's face went white. That's not possible. Elena was clearly ill in the weeks before her death. She was dizzy, nauseous, having balance problems. Symptoms that could easily be caused by certain types of poisoning, Dorothy said quietly. The words dropped into the room like a bomb. The police officers straightened, suddenly alert. Father stared at Dorothy in shock. How dare you? Victoria breathed, her mask finally slipping completely. How dare you come into our home and make such vicious accusations? I loved Eleanor like a sister. I cared for her when she was ill. I comforted her when she was afraid. Afraid of what? Dorothy pressed. What was Elena afraid of? Victoria realized her mistake too late. She was confused because of her condition. She didn't always make sense toward the end. Or, Dorothy said, pulling out her phone, she was afraid because she had discovered the truth about the woman who was slowly killing her. I held my breath as Dorothy pressed play on the audio file I had transferred to her phone during our drive back to the house. Victoria's voice filled the room, cold and calculating, as she discussed insurance policies and tragic accidents. The life insurance policy on Jennifer's mother was just approved. $2 million. And with Jennifer being the sole beneficiary until she turns 18, well, accidents happen to children all the time, don't they? The silence that followed was deafening. Father's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, horrified understanding. The police officers were already reaching for their handcuffs. But Victoria wasn't finished. Even caught red-handed, she had one last card to play. That recording is fake, she said desperately. Anyone can manipulate audio these days. And even if it were real, it proves nothing. I was obviously discussing a hypothetical situation, perhaps a movie plot or book idea. One of the officers looked skeptical. Ma'am, that's quite a stretch. Besides, Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength as she found her footing, how would an 8-year-old child obtain such a recording? The logistics alone are impossible. I felt the room's attention turn to me, and I knew this was the moment I had been building toward. The moment where I would have to reveal just enough of the truth to destroy Victoria without exposing the impossible reality of my rebirth. I didn't get the recording, I said quietly. Mummy left it for me. I pulled the small cassette tape from my pocket, the one Dorothy and I had retrieved from the oak tree. She hid it where she knew I would find it someday, along with her journals and pictures. She left me everything I needed to know the truth. Victoria's composure shattered completely. That's impossible. I searched everywhere. I destroyed everything Eleanor had. The words were out before she could stop them. The officers moved forward immediately. Ma'am, you're going to need to come with us for questioning. As they led Victoria away in handcuffs, she turned back to stare at me with naked hatred and bewilderment. You're 8 years old, she hissed. 8-year-olds don't plan like this. 8-year-olds don't. 8-year-olds whose mothers visit them in dreams can do anything, I said simply. And for the first time since my rebirth, I smiled with genuine happiness as Victoria disappeared into the back of a police car. The nightmare was finally over. Father knelt down and pulled me into his arms, tears streaming down his face. Jennifer, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you. As Dorothy placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and Father held me tight, I knew that this time I wouldn't grow up isolated and poisoned. This time, I would have a family who loved me and protected me. And Victoria would spend the rest of her life paying for the crimes she thought she had gotten away with. The game was over. And I had won. The courtroom was packed as I walked through the heavy oak doors, my heels clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of an 18-year-old who had spent a decade preparing for this moment. Victoria sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her once perfect appearance now haggard after years of imprisonment awaiting trial. But she wasn't alone. Beside her sat Thomas Cross, her real husband, who had finally been tracked down using Mother's photograph. Next to him was Dr. Patricia Manning, the corrupt physician who had helped fabricate medical records. And at the end of the table sat Victoria's sister Claire, who had been running the entire operation from behind the scenes. It had taken 10 years, but we had finally unravelled the complete network. All rise for the Honourable Judge Williams. As the judge entered, Victoria's eyes found mine across the courtroom. Even now, even after everything, she stared at me with that same bewildered hatred, the look of a predator who had been outmanoeuvred by what should have been easy prey. Your Honour, the prosecutor began, the state will prove that the defendants operated a sophisticated murder-for-hire scheme, targeting wealthy widowers and single parents across multiple states. The conspiracy resulted in at least 14 confirmed deaths over a 20-year period, with potential victims numbering in the dozens. I sat in the front row between Father and Dorothy, watching as the evidence I had spent years helping authorities gather was methodically presented. Bank records showing suspicious money transfers, medical records revealing patterns of poisoning symptoms, insurance payouts totaling over $30 million. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. The state calls Jennifer Morrison to the witness stand. I rose smoothly, my hand steady as I placed it on the Bible. 10 years of preparation had led to this moment. Miss Morrison, the prosecutor said gently, can you tell the court what you remember about your mother's final weeks? I remember everything, I said clearly, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. I remember Victoria giving my mother special tea that made her dizzy. I remember the way Mother started stumbling down the stairs weeks before her death, like she was practicing falling. And I remember Victoria practicing her surprise scream in the bathroom mirror. Victoria's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection! The witness was only 3 years old at the time. These cannot possibly be reliable memories. Your Honour, the prosecutor replied, Miss Morrison has what medical experts call hyperthymesia, total autobiographical memory. She can recall every detail of every day of her life with perfect clarity. This condition has been verified by multiple neurologists. It was a lie, of course, but a necessary one. The truth that I had lived through this twice and remembered my adult knowledge from a previous life would never be believed. I'll allow it, the judge ruled. I continued my testimony, describing in perfect detail every conversation I had overheard, every suspicious incident, every moment when Victoria had thought no one was watching. The jury hung on every word, transfixed by the calm recitation of horrors from someone who looked like an innocent teenager. Miss Morrison, Victoria's lawyer said during cross-examination, his voice dripping skepticism, you claim to remember events from when you were 3 years old with perfect clarity, yet you somehow never mentioned any of this to your father or other adults for years. Why should we believe you now? I looked directly at Victoria as I answered. Because I was waiting for the right moment. I knew that Victoria and her accomplices would eventually make mistakes. I knew that if I was patient, I could gather enough evidence to make sure they all paid for what they did, not just to my mother, but to all of their victims. You're asking this court to believe that a 3-year-old child was capable of such long-term planning? I'm asking this court to believe that some children are old souls, I replied, and that some souls refuse to rest until justice is served. Victoria's face had gone white. Something in my tone, in the way I held her gaze, made her shiver despite the warm courtroom. After my testimony, the prosecution presented their final piece of evidence, a video recording that had been found in Thomas Cross's possession when he was arrested. The screen flickered to life, showing Victoria and Thomas in what appeared to be a hotel room, celebrating with champagne. 14 down and how many more to go? Thomas laughed on the recording. As many as it takes, Victoria replied, raising her glass. Richard Morrison's daughter will be next, of course. Such a tragic accident waiting to happen. And after that, she pulled out a photograph of another wealthy widower. Phoenix is lovely this time of year. The recording continued for another hour, with Victoria and her conspirators discussing their victims with casual cruelty, planning future murders, and dividing up their stolen fortunes. The jury watched in horrified silence as the true scope of their crimes was revealed. When the recording ended, Victoria's lawyer slumped in his chair. There would be no defence against such damning evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all charges. The words echoed through the courtroom as Victoria's empire finally crumbled completely. She would spend the rest of her life in prison, along with her conspirators. But as the bailiff led her away, Victoria turned back one final time. "You're not natural," she hissed at me. "Children don't think like you do. Children don't plan like you do. What are you?" I smiled serenely. "I'm justice, Victoria. I'm every victim you thought you silenced coming back to make sure you pay." Her screams of rage followed her down the hallway as the guards dragged her away. 5 years later. The memorial garden was peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, surrounded by roses and jasmine that Mother had loved. I knelt beside the new headstone we had installed, one that finally told the truth about Alina Morrison's life and death. "She would be so proud of you," Dorothy said, placing a wreath of white lilies beside the grave. Father stood behind us, his hair now silver, but his eyes bright with contentment. The years since Victoria's conviction had healed wounds we hadn't even known existed. He had remarried, a kind woman named Rebecca, who had been Mother's college roommate and who remembered Elena with nothing but love. "I got the final insurance settlement today," I told Mother's grave. "The courts awarded us triple damages for Victoria's fraud. It's enough to fund the Eleanor Morrison Foundation for decades." The foundation we had established provided legal aid to families of suspected murder victims, helping them investigate cases that police had written off as accidents or natural deaths. In just 5 years, we had helped solve 37 cold cases and brought dozens of killers to justice. Victoria tried to appeal her sentence again, Father said quietly. It was denied. I nodded. Victoria would die in prison, forgotten by everyone except her victims' families. Thomas Cross had died of a heart attack in solitary confinement. Dr. Manning had been murdered by another inmate, whose mother she had helped kill. Claire had hung herself in her cell rather than face life imprisonment. Justice had been served. But more than that, the cycle of violence they had perpetuated for 20 years had finally been broken. "Jennifer," Dorothy said softly, "I need to ask you something I've wondered about for years." I looked up at her, seeing the question she had carried in silence. "That night you came to my apartment, you knew things no 8-year-old should have known. You found evidence that had been hidden for years. You orchestrated everything with a precision that seemed," she struggled for words, "impossible for a child." I had been waiting for this conversation since my rebirth. Dorothy deserved the truth, or as much of it as she could accept. "Do you believe in guardian angels?" I asked her. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "I believe in love that transcends death. I believe that mothers never stop protecting their children, even from beyond the grave. Then believe that Mother's love was strong enough to give me everything I needed to survive and seek justice. Believe that some souls are chosen to right the wrongs that others think they've gotten away with." Dorothy nodded slowly. Eleanor always said you were special. Even as a baby, you had eyes that seemed to see everything, understand everything. We stood in comfortable silence, 3 generations united in love and remembrance. The little girl who had died from Victoria's poison was at peace. The young woman who had been reborn with her memories was fulfilled, and the family that had been torn apart by greed and evil was whole again. As we walked away from the memorial garden, I felt Mother's presence one final time, not as the desperate spirit who had guided my dreams, but as the peaceful soul who could finally rest knowing her daughter was safe, her killer was punished, and her memory lived on in acts of justice and love. The game was truly over now, and we had all won. Epilogue. 20 years later. I stood at the podium of the International Criminal Justice Conference, looking out at an audience of prosecutors, investigators, and victim advocates from around the world. At 38, I had become one of the most respected experts on serial murder conspiracies, having helped solve over 200 cases through the Morrison Foundation. The most important lesson I've learned, I told the audience, is that predators rely on the silence and isolation of their victims. They count on children being too young to understand, families being too grief-stricken to investigate, and authorities being too overwhelmed to look beyond the surface. In the front row, I could see Father and Dorothy, now both in their 70s, but still attending every one of my speaking engagements with pride. Beside them sat my husband Michael, a fellow investigator I had met while working on a case, and our twin daughters, Eleanor and Hope. But when victims find their voices, when families refuse to accept easy answers, when communities come together to demand justice, that's when the seemingly untouchable predators finally fall. After my speech, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Miss Morrison, my brother died under suspicious circumstances 5 years ago. The police said it was suicide, but my family never believed it. We don't know where to start." I handed her my card, the same way I had handed out hundreds of others over the years. "Start with the truth," I told her. "Start with love, and never, ever give up." As she walked away with renewed hope, I felt the familiar warmth that came with helping another family find justice. Victoria's evil had touched countless lives, but from that darkness had emerged a light that continued to grow brighter with each passing year. Some souls are reborn to right the wrongs of the past. Some children carry the wisdom of ages in their eyes. And sometimes justice delayed is not justice denied. It's justice perfectly timed. The game never truly ends. It just passes to the next generation of players who refuse to let evil win.